Steve Lawrence died on March 7, 2020 in Los Angeles, California at the age of 88, closing the curtain on a career that helped define mid-century American pop and television entertainment. To the world, he was the golden-voiced crooner with effortless charm, half of the beloved duo Steve and Heidi, a fixture of nightclub stages and variety shows for over 5 decades. But behind the tuxedo and television lights was a quieter story, marked by family, heartbreak, and the weight of legacy. He married once to Heidi Gourmet, his lifelong partner in art and in life. Together they raised two sons, one of whom died tragically young. The other, David, would follow a very different path into music. What happened to the family built behind that iconic spotlight? And how do you carry a name that once filled every room with applause? David Nessim Lawrence was the firstborn son of Steve Lawrence and Heidi Gourmet, born in 1960 at a time when his parents were becoming one of the most beloved entertainment duos in America. From the very beginning, his life was surrounded by music, but also by distance. Steve was constantly traveling, between recording studios, television sets, and Las Vegas stages. And Heidi, though deeply devoted, was equally tied to the demanding pace of their shared career. David spent much of his early childhood with nannies or grandparents, adjusting to a home life that was never truly still. While other kids had their fathers reading bedtime stories, David sometimes heard his dad's voice through a TV speaker in the next room, performing live on a national broadcast. That was how he came to know him, not just as a father, but as a public figure admired by millions. As he grew up, David learned to find his place in that strange in-between world. He wasn't completely part of the spotlight, but he was never far from it. Family photo albums showed him backstage at theaters, sitting quietly beside his mother while she applied makeup under bright lights. In one Christmas picture from 1972, 12-year-old David wears a red sweater and smiles between his parents. But his eyes seemed thoughtful, maybe even a little tired. He wasn't rebellious or withdrawn, just observant, the kind of child who would record his father rehearsing on a cassette tape and try to write his own version later. He once gifted Steve a tiny notebook filled with handwritten lyrics he made up after watching rehearsals from the corner of the room. When adulthood came, David didn't follow in his father's footsteps on stage. He didn't want to sing under spotlights or appear in TV specials. Instead, he studied music composition and quietly built a career writing scores for television and film. Over time, his work became more visible, with credits on major Disney Channel productions like High School Musical and Descendants. David carved out his own voice behind the scenes in studios, far from the kind of fame his father lived with. But Steve saw it clearly. In interviews, he often said, "David didn't choose the stage, but I hear myself in everything he writes." Then came 1986, the year that changed everything. David's younger brother Michael died suddenly at just 23 years old from an undiagnosed heart condition while the family was on tour in Atlanta. Frank Sinatra, a close friend of the family, sent a private plane to fly them home to New York. David was silent throughout the funeral. For nearly a year, he stopped writing music. He disappeared from public life, declining work and avoiding calls. Then one day, a song appeared on his piano. It was called For Michael. Never released but played once, on the first anniversary of his brother's death. It was the only time David cried in front of others that year. Now in his 60s, David lives a quiet life with his wife and daughter. He still composes occasionally and lends his experience to younger musicians, but rarely speaks to the press. When Steve passed away in 2024, David delivered the eulogy. He didn't sing. He stood, read a few short words, and sat back down beside his family. In the story of Steve Lawrence's life, David isn't the loudest voice, but he's the one who preserved the music. After the service, someone asked him if he'd ever perform his father's songs. David smiled and said, "Music is what he left behind, and I'll keep it safe for as long as I can." Michael Robert Lawrence was born in 1962, just 2 years after his older brother David. At the time, Steve Lawrence and Heidi Gourmet were at the height of their fame. Their faces appeared on magazine covers, their voices filled living rooms across America, and their schedule rarely slowed down. Michael entered the world not in a quiet home, but in the middle of a whirlwind. TV tapings, concert tours, and studio recordings. By then, Steve had launched his own variety show, while Heidi continued to perform alongside him. Despite the chaos, the family tried to stay close. Michael's earliest years were often spent backstage in dressing rooms, or being rocked to sleep by lullabies sung softly by his mother, while his father was preparing for curtain call. Photos from that era show a chubby-cheeked toddler in a tiny tuxedo, sometimes clapping from the wings during rehearsals. Unlike David, who internalized much of the spotlight, Michael seemed naturally playful, curious, expressive, and completely unbothered by the cameras. But even in those light moments, the truth remained. His parents were present, but rarely still. Michael grew up with love, yes, but also with long stretches of waiting. As Michael entered his teenage years, the differences between him and David became more obvious. While David was quiet, careful, and introspective, Michael was active, social, and full of energy. He played sports, made friends easily, and didn't show much interest in the family's musical world. He admired his parents but didn't dream of following them onto the stage. If anything, Michael preferred being in the audience. Steve would often bring both sons along to rehearsals or special events. But Michael was the one asking to leave early so he could catch a baseball game or meet friends. There was no tension in it, just honesty. Once, in a handwritten note for Father's Day, Michael wrote, "You're amazing at what you do, Dad, but I don't think I could ever do it like you do." It wasn't a rejection. It was just a boy knowing who he was. Still, the connection between father and son remained strong in private ways. Steve and Michael often went fishing together during breaks between tours. It became their tradition. Quiet mornings on a lake, no cameras, no music, just conversation. Steve once said that those were the only times he felt like a regular dad. Michael would ask about old performances, not because he wanted to perform himself, but because he wanted to understand who his father really was when the lights were off. In one rare family video from the early 80s, Michael is seen tossing a football to his father outside their house, laughing as Steve fumbles the catch. "That's the only kind of stage I'll ever be on," he jokes into the camera. Michael's teenage years were relatively normal for a kid with famous parents. He went to private school, took interest in media and production, and began learning more about technical work behind the scenes. Instead of joining a band or acting in school plays, he spent time with AV equipment, helping set up school assemblies and experimenting with audio mixers. It wasn't music, but it was still connected to the entertainment world, just from another angle. Steve and Heidi supported him fully. They never pressured him to sing or perform. They understood that Michael didn't need applause to feel fulfilled. He just wanted to contribute quietly, on his own terms. In interviews, Steve would often smile when asked about his sons. "David writes the music," he'd say, "and Michael understands everything behind it." It was a simple statement, but it meant a lot. Even if Michael wasn't a performer, he was still part of the rhythm that made the Lawrence family work. He was present, not on stage, but always nearby, always helping, always grounded. And for a family surrounded by constant spotlight, that kind of steady presence was something rare and deeply valued. As Michael reached adulthood, he continued down the quiet, practical path he had chosen during his teenage years. He wasn't interested in fame, and he never tried to use his last name to open doors. While David pursued music composition and gradually built a name in the entertainment industry, Michael focused on the technical side of things. After college, he found work in media production and support roles, the kind of behind-the-scenes jobs that kept shows running but rarely earned public credit. He worked with lighting, audio, and stage coordination, sometimes joining his parents' team during special performances. Steve and Heidi appreciated having him nearby, not because he was a son, but because he was capable and calm. He didn't ask for attention, didn't demand anything. He just did his job well. Michael never tried to launch his own brand or break into show business as a solo figure. He liked being part of something bigger, but not being the focus of it. When friends or colleagues realized he was the son of Steve Lawrence, he would usually just smile and nod, then change the subject. He wasn't ashamed, just private. To him, being a Lawrence didn't mean being on stage. It meant doing your part with care. His parents respected that. Steve, in particular, often told people that Michael had a good head, steady hands, and a kind heart. That was enough. While David became more visible through his musical work and occasional press features, Michael remained in the background, supporting quietly. He sometimes worked on small concerts or private events organized by the family. When Steve and Heidi had anniversary shows or charity appearances, Michael would manage logistics, make sure the sound checks went smoothly, and keep the crew on time. He never pushed to be seen. It was clear that he didn't want the spotlight, not even a little of it. He felt most comfortable when things ran smoothly and no one noticed he was there. Despite his choice to live a more private life, Michael was a strong part of the family structure. He kept close to David and often helped him test new equipment or review early music recordings. He also remained deeply connected to his parents, especially during their off-tour months. He lived independently but made time for family dinners and holidays. There were no scandals, no career shifts, no big announcements. Just a quiet, steady adulthood built on small contributions and strong relationships. In a family known for performance, Michael became the example of what it meant to simply live with purpose, without applause, without headlines. He may not have had a stage, but he built something meaningful all the same. In early 1986, life for the Lawrence family was steady and by all appearances peaceful. Steve and Heidi were still performing, though less frequently than in their peak years. David was steadily growing in the music industry, and Michael, at 23, had settled into a support role that fit him well. He had just finished working on a technical crew for a small East Coast theater tour, helping manage sound and backstage operations for a series of live performances. He was healthy, active, and always quick to help, the one who quietly made sure everything ran smoothly, just as he had always done. Then, without warning, everything changed. On March 14, 1986, while the family was staying in Atlanta after a performance, Michael collapsed suddenly in his hotel room. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but it was too late. The cause, a previously undiagnosed heart rhythm disorder, something silent, invisible, and devastating. He was only 23 years old. News of Michael's passing shocked not only the family, but also their circle of friends, many of whom had watched him grow up from the wings of theaters across the country. Frank Sinatra, a longtime friend of Steve and Heidi, immediately sent his private jet to fly the family home to New York. No press releases were given, no interviews were granted. The Lawrences shut their doors and disappeared from public life. In the weeks that followed, Steve and Heidi canceled all upcoming appearances. David withdrew from music completely, and Michael's name, so rarely mentioned in the press before, became a silent wound inside the family. One family friend said it was as if a light had gone out behind all the music. Steve, who had always been composed in public, broke down during a private memorial. Heidi, who was known for her strength, didn't speak to anyone outside the family for nearly 2 months. In the years that followed, they rarely spoke publicly about Michael. When asked, they would simply say, "He was our son. He was the best of us." There were no charity foundations created, no songs released in his name, only one small tribute, a framed photo of Michael in the family home, placed beside a studio microphone he once helped install. The suddenness of Michael's death left an emotional gap that never truly closed. For David, it was a turning point that changed the way he wrote music. For Steve and Heidi, it became the quiet ache they carried into every performance. From that year on, every family photo was missing a face. Every holiday had a chair that stayed empty. And yet, no one tried to fill it. Michael hadn't chased fame. He hadn't left behind albums or public achievements. But his absence was louder than any applause they'd ever received. Today, when people speak about the Lawrence family, they usually mention Steve's voice, Heidi's elegance, or David's musical career. Michael's name comes up less often, not because he was forgotten, but because his story remained mostly private, just as he lived. Among those who knew him, there's no confusion about who he was. He wasn't a star, but he was the one who always showed up. He fixed the cables, checked the sound levels, carried the equipment, and then quietly stepped aside before the curtain rose. In family gatherings, he was the one who helped set the table and made sure everyone had what they needed. Even now, his absence is noticed not through the things he did in public, but through the spaces he used to quietly fill in private. David has said in several interviews that Michael's influence still guides his work. When composing a score or working late in a studio, he often thinks about how his brother would approach a challenge, calmly, practically, without drama. Their relationship was never built on competition or expectations. They were simply two brothers who respected each other's paths, one in front of the microphone, one behind the scenes. And when their father passed away in 2024, David made sure Michael's name was part of the eulogy, not in a dramatic tribute, but in a short, honest sentence. Dad always said Michael was the one who held everything together. That was the truth. In the family's photo albums, Michael appears in quiet moments, helping Steve with a jacket backstage, standing beside Heidi after a show, laughing with David over a board game. There's no headline attached, no biography written, but his place in the story is permanent. Every family has someone who chooses a smaller role and ends up meaning more than anyone expected. For the Lawrences, that person was Michael. In the grand picture of Steve Lawrence's legacy, filled with gold records, sold-out shows, and standing ovations, there's one part that can't be measured in awards. It's the steady hand of a son who didn't seek fame, but gave the family a sense of balance they never knew they'd need. Michael Robert Lawrence may have left this world too soon, but his impact never left the people who loved him. His name may not echo on a stage, but it still lives in every quiet moment the family remembers. He was the rhythm behind the song, steady, silent, and irreplaceable. But Steve Lawrence's story is only one piece of a much larger portrait, a world where polished voices and perfect harmonies often mask the quiet struggles behind the curtain. Beyond the television specials and Grammy-winning duets were two sons walking entirely different paths, one who carried the music forward and one whose absence would echo through every performance that came after. In the episodes ahead, we'll look deeper into the lives shaped by fame's heavy shadow, into families who seemed untouched on the surface but lived through moments no audience ever saw. Stay with us. The next name carries just as much weight and just as many untold truths. If you don't want to miss what comes next, subscribe to Legacy Uncovered and join us as we reveal more hidden stories behind the legends. Thank you for listening.